This week on Breaking News, we look into the realities of our public education system. Today's episode, Hajar Elementary. Our first look into the Hajar Elementary School recognizes this as a home to 348 students. This Title I school also houses 32 passionate and supportive teachers that aim to create ideal environments for every student. With the majority being white students, Hajar also has a ranged percentage of African American, Asian, Hispanic, and other ethnicities within its hallways. Within its own district, Hajar faces the highest amount of struggling financially high-need students and works with large numbers of ELL, first language not as English, and students with disabilities. Fortunately, with Title I services, Hajar receives a higher ratio of teacher to student, 14.1 instead of 13:1 in the state. This helps accommodate these students' needs. Or does it? Upon first entry, the Hajar School looks like any other suburban elementary school, nestled in a small, tight-knit community. Unique to Hajar is its school-wide teaching philosophies of multicultural education and restorative justice practices. Hajar has taken the initiative to focus on teaching practices that emulate student identity and culture. Using music, art, movement, cultural connections, and rich materials, the Hajar teachers believe students learn more when equity and culture is at the forefront of a child's education. With 26% of students recognized as a minority population, Hajar understands the mission for reaching all of their students. Multicultural education and restorative justice practices are also in place to best teach the high numbers of low-income and high-need students as well. Their philosophies at Hajar pay closer attention to the individual and unique capabilities a student has rather than pushing for the demands of the state. They believe every child is capable of high expectations, but the rate at which the state describes this level of expectation is not equitable to all groups of students. What is unfortunate about the honest and intentional philosophies at Hajar is the positions according to the state's proficiency levels places Hajar below 50% of other schools. Massachusetts accounts schools for ELA, math, science, etc. proficiency levels to all of its schools. Each school is regarded on the same criteria. But what seems to be so corrupt is that, like Hajar, so many schools are doing what is best for their students, yet in the state's eyes, it doesn't look to be enough. No child learns the same, but our state recognizes all levels as the same. Doesn't seem so equal and equitable, does it? A teacher at Hajar stated,
Hajar embraces each student. So many students come from different families, whether it's a one-parent household or one that speaks Arabic. We try our best to make each student feel represented and supported. I think that anyone can attest to that.
So, let's jump into some of the realities of our public education system, one that seems to fail schools like Hajar and perpetuate inequalities amongst its students. Massachusetts' policy speaks of creating a public education system of sufficient quality to extend to all children the opportunity to reach their fullest potentials. This statement supports ideas of individualism, technicism, localism, assimilation, and standard language ideology. First off, Massachusetts state policy formed normative goals of equal and quality education. This norm? Whiteness, upper middle class. Standards that already set up students such as those at Hajar for failure. In her academic journal, Vieska mentions how she researched these dominant norms in schools with state testing and common curriculum. She mentions how these standards of equal and quality education are not equitable. Standards may be equal amongst the state, but no group of student is equal. This doesn't seem so equitable, does it? She explains how this equalness deliberately perpetuates domination from some groups and outsider status for others. The Hajar is an outsider. Much of Massachusetts school policy reflects linguicism and racism directly within its scripture. It accounts for equal language and proficiency skills, sameness in accountability, etc. Yet our reality is that proficiency correlates to academic readiness, demographic needs, and cultural accuracies in schools. Inconsistencies within our own state policies are legally creating sanctioned opportunities to perpetuate the disadvantages of some groups over the dominant. Hajar may be using the best practices for its students and the needs of its students, but on paper, Massachusetts policy considers Hajar no better than 31% of state schools, due to proficiency and accountability claims. Our focus of this episode now points to state funding and how expenditures play a role in the education system. On average, Massachusetts schools spend about $19,689 per student. Hajar can only spend $15,258 per student. Much of this discretion is due to the low-income community that Hajar resides. The slower spending further places Hajar to a disadvantage compared to other state schools. They have less opportunity to supply resources and materials that so many schools receive and that help them achieve differentiating proficiency levels. Hajar also faces issues within its individual school funds, for example, the hiring of substitutes. Many times, administration has to pull paras, one-to-one aides, and resource teachers to sub in different areas of the school. Looks like Hajar's 14-to-1 ratio isn't working out for the school's best intentions. The Hajar school faces many challenges, much of which are rooted in discrepancies of policy and institutionalized disadvantages. Yet, even with such challenges, Hajar hawks continue to soar. There is always the presence of passion and equity, walls filled with culture, representation, and intent for providing the best opportunities to learn for all of its students. The Hajar's strengths are grounded in multiculturalism and restorative justice, the beliefs that all of their students are capable, cultural beings who shall receive respectful education that reflects their individualism. A student teacher, Ms. Gorski, accounted, "So much of my own pedagogical ideals are framed around equity and multiculturalism. And when seeing these realities at such a great school and in such great practice, it only more enlightened me to keep pursuing these types of ideals. I've seen growth in student passion as it relates to learning and how being culturally responsive connects to their lives of learning. Honestly, it made me rethink how much still needs to be changed in our educational system, what schools need to work on better to be accounted for, how accountability, states testing, and policy are honestly the overarching demise of so many well-practiced and equitable schools. I believe I'd flourish at a school like Hajar. It highlights the uniqueness and individuality of all of its students, and Hajar works so hard to reflect their students and create a safe and inclusive space. I call Hajar home." And that concludes today's episode on realities of public education. Hajar Elementary School.